You know, I bet you've heard of the term deliberate practice, especially if you've clicked onto this video, but I bet you aren't doing it as effectively as you could be. My name is Josh Gu, and I'm taking my years of experience learning, teaching, and performing, and sharing all of my best clarinet and music tips so you can get more out of your practice, and most importantly, have fun. You can learn more about all of my many resources at QuickStartClarinet.com, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos. When you Google deliberate practice, you end up getting a lot of different results from a lot of different fields of study, and I think in those it's really helpful to understand why deliberate practice is important, and you can start to get a taste of deliberate practice. What I found from my brief Google research into deliberate practice was that the whole point of it is to not mindlessly practice, and that deliberate practice is the path to improvement and the path to high level of whatever skill you're working on, which I think sounds great. I think we all want to be improving in our playing, and reaching a higher level is always a fantastic goal to have in our playing. When you look more specifically at the music field, there's a process for it that tends to come up pretty regularly, which is this plan, do, reflect cycle. And I found it from many sources. I'm the most familiar with that idea coming from Greg Goodhart and Modacity, but I don't really know where it first came from or who officially came up with the plan, do, reflect cycle. And that starts to give us an idea of how to do deliberate practice, but it can still be kind of muddy, and that's what I'm hoping to clear up in this video. So now that you know deliberate practice is the key to growth and not just sort of stagnating at whatever level you're at and getting frustrated in practice, the question becomes, how do we actually do that? And plan, do, reflect, that cycle is sort of there, but how do we actually plan, do, and reflect? What does that mean? On one scale, it could be something like plan what you're going to practice for the day, practice that, and then reflect and put in your practice journal that that's what you practiced for the day. That version of plan, do, reflect I find to be very unhelpful. I've tried a few times over the course of my life to really have a practice journal and really plan out, like, this is what I need to work on, this is when I'm going to need to work on it, and so on. And if you watch the Monday Music Motivation, I kind of have a loose practice journal along those lines. That can be really helpful for not having to decide what you're going to work on when you get into the practice room. Can also be really helpful for actually scheduling your practice time so you actually practice rather than binging some more shows on Netflix or whatever else you might be doing. However, I don't find that that makes me improve as a musician. It's totally possible to plan, do, reflect like that and get into the practice room, play the pieces that I said I was going to play, and just sort of play through them and not make any improvement. And then in the reflection at the end, I'm like, good job, I practiced, but I'm really stagnant in my practice. And I think a lot of people practice that way, especially when we have the continuous concert band cycle where it's like, okay, I have these pieces, I need to learn them, I'm trying to get them ready for the concert happens, it went okay, it went pretty much how it always goes. Then I get more pieces for the next concert, and prepare those and play through them, and we sort of end up on that continuous loop. And there's maybe a little bit of mindfulness when it comes to listening to the pieces or learning how the pieces go, but ultimately there's more mindlessness than mindfulness because we're sort of just repeating the same habits and going through the same patterns and not actually making improvements that will last long term. So we can take that plan, do, reflect cycle and put it on a little bit more micro scale. So instead of saying, I'm going to practice these pieces on this day for our plan, we go a little bit more microscopic, more granular, and say, I'm going to practice this section of this piece, or this part of this piece, or even this one particularly tricky run. And then we can do that, and then we can reflect on how it goes. And that's where we start to have a much more useful idea of deliberate practice in the plan, do, reflect cycle of things. However, that's still very surface level, and I find most of the deliberate practice resources I found, that's about the deepest that they go with it. Is plan to do a smaller section, identify smaller sections, do it, and then improve it. But how do we actually improve it? We can plan and find the hardest parts, which is fantastic. We can spend most of our practice time on the hardest parts rather than just mindlessly playing through the whole piece. Fantastic. But that's still not making improvement. That's just playing the hardest stuff over and over. And that's where practice can become really frustrating. You play the hard part and you're like, oh, this is still hard. It's not going well. I'm going to do it again. It's still hard. Still not going well. I'm going to do it again. And you start banging your head against the wall and you're not actually making improvements. Now, I think the key step to deliberate practice is to put reflection in very early. All of the resources I found about deliberate practice said having feedback was one of the key components to it and one of the most important pieces of deliberate practice. And of course that can be feedback from a teacher, which can be really helpful, but it can also be your own personal feedback, and the clearer image you have of how you want to sound and how you want to play, the easier it is to give that feedback to yourself. But that reflection needs to get in there very early and very often, and that's where the power of deliberate practice comes in, is when we reflect more often, when we give ourselves more feedback. So you're planning to do that hard part, you do the hard part, and then pause. Don't just say, oh, that was really hard, that didn't go well, I'm going to try it again. Pause, reflect, and figure out why it didn't go well. I think most of us usually get to about that area. If you get to that point in your practice where you're reflecting on it and you're actually pausing after you make mistakes and recognizing those mistakes, that's awesome. You probably have gotten to a pretty solid intermediate level playing. You've probably experienced some growth in your playing and some satisfaction, and that feels good. But if that's as far as you go, you're still going to plateau again. The reason why you'll plateau at that point, and I think this is the point where probably most musicians plateau in their practicing, is because you're going to know what's wrong, but you're still not going to know how to fix it. And that's, I think, the biggest problem or the biggest opportunity for improvement in the plan, do, reflect cycle, is it's not clear how you get from reflecting to planning. There's almost feels like there's a step missing for how do we go from, okay, I did the thing, I reflected that this went well, this went bad, etc., etc. But then how does that turn into a plan and complete the feedback loop? What I think needs to happen is in your reflection, you need to get deeper than the surface level problem. So let's say, for example, the surface level problem is as I'm isolating this hard bit of the music, I keep wanting to play an F natural rather than an F sharp. That's the surface level problem. You could have a very surface level solution to that, which would be, okay, mark in the accidental or mark in the key signature so that you can visually see that's an F sharp there. And that could be fine. That could complete the feedback loop where you say, okay, write in F sharp, that's my plan, that's what I'm going to do differently. Now I'll have it written in, now I'll play it again and it'll go right. But it might not go right. If it doesn't go right again, then you have to reflect deeper. You can't just say, well, I played an F natural instead of F sharp again, I guess I'll play it again and try again. And then you sort of bang your head against the wall doing that. You need to go deeper as to why are you playing an F natural rather than an F sharp. A couple ways that you could go deeper with that is maybe look at the chord and be like, oh, I thought it was a D minor chord, but it's actually D major, so it should be F sharp. That shift of thinking might be enough. And that could be a plan, is I'm going to see that chord as D major rather than D minor. That's something you can intentionally do differently. Another example could be something like, oh, the F sharp is actually a more awkward fingering to get to. I have to sort of do some weird finger coordination there that's not feeling comfortable. But that's not a solution yet. That is one layer deeper. Oh, it's the comfort of the finger coordination that's the issue. But that's not a solution yet. You see how write in an F sharp, that became a clear solution. See it as D major, that's a clear solution. The fingering is awkward. That doesn't lead to a clear solution. Like, make the fingering less awkward? That isn't really a solution. So we need to keep going deeper along that train of thought. The fingering is awkward. The fingering is awkward because my fingers are lifting up too much on the previous note and my hand's getting out of position. Now do you see how that can lead to a plan to do something differently? If my fingers are lifting up too much and my hand's getting out of position, then I need to lift the fingers less, keep the hand in position. That's something that I can try to do differently and then see what happens. And that may or may not fix it. If it doesn't fix it, then you need to keep going deeper and keep working out more and more potential solutions. But the missing step to the plan, do, reflect cycle is how to get from reflect to plan. And I think what that is searching for a solution. Going deep enough with the problem that you're reflecting about so that it becomes a natural solution, just like we did with the awkward finger coordination, going one layer deeper to being too much finger motion and getting the hand out of its nice, natural, relaxed hand position. I want to give one more quick idea for how to think of this, and this is the pink elephant idea. So you've probably heard the phrase, like, if I tell you, don't think of a pink elephant, you're immediately going to think of a pink elephant, right? So when you're going from reflecting and going deep enough with that problem to actually find a solution to plan to do differently the next time, I want that plan to be something proactive and something positive that you can do. So with that finger motion example, I'm moving my fingers too much. That's still a problem side, and we need to turn that into a solution side. The solution to the problem of I'm moving my fingers too much is not don't move my fingers so much. That's a pink elephant. Okay, don't move my fingers so much. You're immediately going to move your fingers so much because you're thinking of what not to do. Instead, think, move my fingers less, keep my fingers closer to the keys, keep my fingers in position. Those are positive versions of that, rather than don't think of the pink elephant, it's think of the blue elephant kind of idea. So to wrap this all up, what you need to improve as a clarinetist or any musician is deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is the path to improvement. Deliberate practice is mindfulness and continued feedback using the plan, do, reflect, find a solution process. And what you need to be actively thinking about when you're practicing, and I want you to actually try this the next time you practice, is get into the practice room, work on the stuff that you're working on, pause, reflect, and as you're reflecting, find something deliberate to do different. And that's, I think, the true key to deliberate practice, is that you're deliberately doing something different. And that turns into sort of the scientific method, where you're testing variables, trying to control the other variables, and seeing the outcome that happens. Deliberate practice is very, very similar to the scientific method, where we want to solve this problem, so we hypothesize, I'm going to move my fingers less, I'm going to keep my fingers closer to the keys, and I'm going to stay in my natural relaxed hand position. That's my hypothesis for what will solve this. I do it and run the experiment, trying to control the other variables as much as possible. And then I reflect and conclude what the outcome was. If it was the outcome that I wanted, great, I'll move on to working on something else. If it's the outcome not what I wanted, if it was still a problem, then I have to go deeper into the problem and find more potential solutions to hypothesize and experiment with and try again. So put on your lab coats, go deeper with the problems until you have something that you can turn into a positive solution to deliberately do different on your next attempt, and then just keep doing that. Keep finding new things, keep finding solutions, keep experimenting, keep exploring, and keep doing, and you'll find that that feedback loop turns into massive growth in your clarinet playing and in your music journey, or whatever you're working on. Deliberate practice actually applies to all aspects of life. So if you can keep that process going, you're going to keep improving. Last but not least, if you're looking for more things to sort of dig into, like maybe you're like, okay, I know how to practice, that's awesome, but I don't actually know what the problems are of the clarinet or what I should be working on to improve my clarinet playing, then I highly encourage you to check out the Next Generation Clarinet Method Test Drive. You can go to quickstartclarinet.com/test drive to check that out. It's this 3-part training videos where I talk about sort of how to play the clarinet, the exercises that are going to make the most difference in your clarinet playing journey, and then how to look at music to find more opportunities for music, and sort of how to get into this practice loop and how to actually apply deliberate practice to a practice session. So if that sounds interesting to you, go to quickstartclarinet.com/test drive. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope that you have tremendous growth in your clarinet playing through deliberate practice, and I look forward to seeing you in another video. And last but not least, a huge heartfelt thank you to the Dennersons. This is like the QuickStart Clarinet family who supports the channel and helps to make everything that I do possible. If you would like to support the channel and get some awesome rewards in return where we can work one-on-one over video and you can have my full support moving forward on your clarinet journey, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/supporter.